Delighted on this new episode of Words, Images, and Worlds to be talking with author and creator Mel Gillman. Mel, many thanks for coming. I know that you're the author of As the Crow Flies, which I adore, and we're on this episode talking about the Goblin Throne. So curious about getting into all of these worlds that you're fashioning.
Of course. Thank you. I'm excited to talk about this.
Yeah, yeah, glad to have you here. We should probably first talk about the creative spark. So, where did the idea of the Goblin Throne come from? What was that genesis like?
Sure. So I've been making horror comics for a while now, and oftentimes the way that I'm constructing horror comics is they're horror romance and horror romance that kind of lives in this sort of fairy tale-esque environment, this like quasi-medieval space. So it has elements of, folk horror in there and is drawing a little bit from folkloric traditions, even if it's not necessarily a rewrite of an existing fable that has existed for, millennia. So with the Goblin Throne, I was thinking a lot about, kind of the classic Fey bargain of giving up your firstborn for, in exchange for something. That's sort of a trope that shows up in a lot of fables and fairy tales. And usually those kind of stories end up sort of in the changeling zone where it's like, you give your firstborn up, maybe you end up with like a Fey baby, or maybe not. Maybe you just live with the regret of having given up your own child in exchange for something. Um, but with the Goblin Throne, the moment when I knew that I had something that felt interesting to me is when I started thinking of it more as a marriage contract as opposed to like a changeling scenario. And the character of the Goblin Queen kind of rose and pretty naturally out of that idea because I could immediately feel like her loneliness and her sort of craven desire and longing for like a spouse, a family, any family. Like being at that point where like a random person walks into your lair and you're like, yeah, let's go. Like that level of desperation was something that I could like kind of hang on to as a writer and could build a story around. So that was the initial spark for this story, and I ended up spinning it out from there.
It's nice. Curious about that move from genre because I know that As the Crow Flies was very real life. So, what led you into the space of horror and fairy tale and fantasy?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I've actually been hopping around from genre to genre kind of my whole career as a cartoonist. Also oddly, before As the Crow Flies, the first graphic novel that I ever did was actually a lesbian romance, and a vampire lesbian romance specifically. So, went from vampire lesbian romance to realistic middle grade fiction for As the Crow Flies to like a Western adventure story for Stage Dreams, and then to like sweet and kind and loving fairy tales for Other Ever Afters, and now I'm moving more into horror. So I've kind of like bopped around a lot in terms of genre, and I think that's just because I'm a person who like really loves genre fiction in general. That's a lot of what I read, and I'm also just kind of a like a person who's interested in lots of different types of stories. But I will say the thing that like really makes me feel very enamored of horror right now is it's actually about the ethical complexities that you can get into in horror. Horror is a genre where it is not an expectation for obvious reasons that your characters are like good people or are making sort of the correct moral choices. And it's sort of understood that your reader is still willing to go along with these characters, not necessarily supporting their actions, but willing to like, let's see how this plays out and let's see where this goes. And horror is also all about like allegories, and it's about these sort of complex metaphorical structures that we build to have ethical and moral conversations with ourselves and to get into sort of the meat of the difficult problems that we encounter in our lives and the things that we are afraid of and the things that we have difficulty putting into words because we're so afraid of them. So I think with like horror romance specifically, the intersection that sits at the crossroads of those two genres is we can talk about the things that we are afraid of in relationships, in families, in loving. And that's really rich material because there's a lot there that, is a part of our daily lives and also is very rich and complicated and deserving of unpacking. So when you're writing horror romance, you can really get into that. And the nice thing about, fables is since it's all allegory, you're always sort of letting that layer of ethical complexity sit just below the surface. You're not like banging your reader over the head with it. You're not saying like, here's what my story is about. You're sort of just letting it be the background radiation behind your story and trusting that your reader is going to be smart enough and intuitive enough to pick up on what you're talking about here and to feel it in a sort of core, visceral way. So that's the thing that I have loved about horror and horror romance especially is sort of the playing field that it's sitting on and the level of complexity that you can talk about there. That's been a very fun sandbox to play in, and I'm having a lot of fun being here.
I love it. I love that movement among genres, and I'm editing a collection right now on horror, and what makes it work across media. So much of what you said there just rings so very true.
Definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great genre. There's so much you can do here.
What kind of allegory and what sort of ethical complexities did you want to explore in this story using all of the tools that you have at your disposal?
Oh yeah. So I think that the Goblin Throne, kind of on that layer of allegory below the surface level plot that's happening, it's a story that's being told from three different perspectives. So we're essentially, as readers, hearing the same story retold to us three times from three different characters' viewpoints, and every time we are sort of forced to question what we thought we knew happened in the story. And I'm not the first author to come up with that idea. There's plenty of books out there that have played with that exact process. But the nice thing about doing that is it allowed me to have sort of a different ethical conversation that's happening in each one of those perspectives because there are different things that are important to each of the three central characters in this narrative. So the allegory answer is a little different for each of the three parts there. In the first part, which is told from the perspective of the firstborn son at the center of this like fey bargain. He's there partly to do the like the work that has to happen in like nearly all fantasy where there's almost always like a character who's kind of new so that people can explain things to them so that the reader can also get that information. And that's sort of what this kid's role in the story is. But his is also a question of like, what does it feel like to realize that a parent who you've trusted has been lying to you and lying to you in a way which is going to like physically put you in danger in short order. And how do we determine who we trust when we are in situations where we don't have all the information and we're trying to determine which version of the story we choose to believe. That's kind of what that kid is grappling with. His is kind of the like simplest of the three layers here. When we get into the mom section, the human woman who is, kind of at the center of the love story that's being told here. For her, was thinking a lot about, I mean, obviously about like attraction to monsters and what that means. And also, like, her story is in a lot of ways about how we navigate lifelong guilt for the actions that we have caused and the harm that we've done onto others, and what our responsibility is when we have committed something which causes irreparable harm to someone else, and how you navigate that debt that you have occurred. And with the mom's character arc, this is sort of spoilers for the story, but I'm going to say it in such a vague way that it probably hopefully won't matter. The mom's character arc is essentially about coming to the realization that there is a level of moral debt that you can incur in your life that you have to carry. You cannot absolve yourself of that debt. You simply have to learn how to bear it for the rest of your days. Like, you can't shed the guilt. You can't get rid of it. There's no absolution for this. It simply becomes your task to continue carrying it. And that was kind of the core moral idea that I was thinking about with her. And then we get to the Goblin Queen, who is I was mentioning earlier that she has this, kind of desperate loneliness, and it's self-imposed loneliness. She's definitely the author of her own circumstances in many ways here. And, no one to blame but yourself in a lot of horror, which, is part of what makes the genre work. And she, I put a lot of like middle-aged lesbian dating feelings into her. She's kind of a character that I hope or imagine that there's going to be a lot of queer people out there that sort of see an uncomfortable reflection of themselves in, specifically in the sense of that, like, that loneliness. And I think this is especially true for when we're talking about like lesbians and like women loving women in a broad community sense, because you're a person who's living with already within a like incredibly narrow dating pool, and you're also oftentimes a person who had a longer path towards like sort of figuring yourself out compared to a lot of like cis heterosexual people. So you end up in these situations where you're kind of navigating those like awkward early dating experiences like into middle age. And you also end up in situations where I think that there's a common thread that happens to people sometimes where you like hit middle age and you're like, the clock is ticking and like romance hasn't happened for me yet. And I know it's something that I want and I know it's something that I'm interested in, but like it ain't happened yet. And it also, like, the chances of it happening it feels like a window that's getting closed quickly for like the
Mm.
queer circumstances specifically. And how you navigate that as a person and what that does to you, and what the texture of that specific loneliness feels like. The Goblin Queen is also a character who I think tells herself a story that I see a lot of people telling themselves, which is like, you hit that age where you're like, you know what? I'm ready. And you're like, I'm a middle-aged person. I have sorted all my shit out. I know who I am. I am ready to be like the best partner imaginable for somebody. And how that's often kind of a lie that we tell ourselves. And it doesn't always work out in the way that you think it does, but you have this image in your head of the kind of partner and lover that you imagine you could be, and you are like ready to go at the first available opportunity. The Goblin Queen kind of has this position where it's like, she meets a woman and 15 minutes later is like, all right, we're not just getting married, like we're having a kid together. That is like the decision I have made that's going to create the entire rest of the problems in this narrative. And that comes from, I think, a very human place of that loneliness that feels shameful in a way, and that people have difficulty talking about, but it's also a very common experience. I think especially for like queer people and lesbian communities specifically, there's a lot of this going on. And that was the thing that I really wanted to dig into is, what does that feel like, and how is that specific to like women who love women and the broader community around that, and how can we like talk about that in an allegorical way in a horror romance? So it's fun to get to sink your teeth into these things because again, it's stuff that people feel a lot of shame around and don't necessarily want to talk about directly, even if it's a really common feeling and experience. But that's again, that's the beautiful thing about horror. It's sort of taking those things that we are ashamed of and sort of like ripping the band-aid off and like shining a light on them. And that's been a horrible treat to get to talk about in this story.
Uh, you're exploring so much, and I'm wondering about Iron Circus. I'm wondering about the creative connection there in the community, and what that collaboration has been like.
Yeah. So this is my second book that I've worked on with Iron Circus. They were the publisher of As the Crow Flies back in the day. And there's a lot of things that I really like about Iron Circus. I think they have kind of a unusual, not just an unusual publishing model, but also sort of a unusual publishing ethos in the landscape of graphic novel publishers that exist right now. It's so hard for indie publishers to get to a size where they are able to reach the level of like bookstore and library distribution that the bigger publishers are able to enjoy. And Iron Circus kind of stands out among those indie publishers who are at that like bookstore and library distro level for being a very unafraid of like weird experimental adult storytelling, and also genre fiction that is doing something like weird and a little fucked up, and also they're unafraid of web comics, which is also a little bit unusual among graphic novel publishers right now. They have always been very in favor of the comics that they are publishing in print also being available for people for free online. And that is something that makes them a little bit unique because a lot of publishers are still kind of stuck in that mindset of like, well, we have to be, offering something exclusive to the readers in the print version. Otherwise, why would they bother buying it? So that intersection of like being okay with adult comics, being okay with like weird genre fiction comics, and being okay with web comics. Though that's kind of a unusual triangulation that Iron Circus has for a graphic novel publisher that is also at the size where it's able to get, bookstore and library distribution. So for that, I am actually really happy to be working with them in for this book especially. They kind of understood right off the bat that this is a like freaky story that I'm telling that's doing some like formal experimentation in terms of the narrative style, in terms of the structure, and in terms of the, allegorical content. And, never once had to worry about them being put off by adult content in the story, gore, violence, sex, any of that. Or them being worried about me putting the comic out online for people to read. So for all of those factors, I am happy to be working with Iron Circus.
Really lovely. I know the book is on Kickstarter, so anything that people should know about the campaign, any details that you'd like to share there?
Sure. So the campaign is going to be kind of a pre-order campaign for a beautiful hardcover version of the book. I had a lot of fun designing the cover for this book, incidentally. I was looking at a lot of the like design principles that informed like those old bodice ripper romances that you would find in like grocery stores in the 90s. Like the, really sharp lettering and the, the shiny text and the like embossed lettering. There's a lot of that goes into this cover design that was very fun. And we've got some like little fun bonuses that are options for people to add on with the Kickstarter. I'm going to be designing a book plate. You can get a book plate there. I'm probably for a stretch goal going to be designing a like silly, more traditional romance novel cover as a like
Lovely.
poster for the story, which will be very, very silly. There's also an option to get original art through the campaign, which is unusual. So I work traditionally. I draw everything in colored pencil, and I don't normally sell my originals off. So if anybody listening to this is interested in owning a like physical piece of artwork from this book and a physical piece of like colored pencil comics art, which is a little bit of an unusual thing in comics, then this is one of the only ways to do so right now. And I hope people take advantage of that because I actually am really proud of the originals that are coming out from this comic. There's something about colored pencil that it even gets lost in the like printed versions of my comics where there's a depth and a three-dimensionality to the layering process because colored pencil is all about like color layer, color layer, color layer, color layer that end up going like 6 layers deep. And you can actually see that when you look at the originals. There's sort of a depth to them that gets lost in the print edition. So for people who are kind of interested in that, this would be something that I would recommend to you if you're a comics art collector out there.
And I do love the colored pencil technique that you use. That's really interesting and makes for a great page.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, even if it's a lot of work.
Yeah. Uh, any places where we can go and find out about your work, follow along, support, websites, social media, things of that nature.
Definitely. So I'm on most of the usual social media platforms. I'm M. Gillman on Instagram. I'm Mel Gillman on Blue Sky and on Tumblr. Another more specific place that I would recommend for people is if you are interested in the Goblin Throne, but you also are kind of a try it before you buy it type. The comic is going up as a free webcomic right now on thegoblinthrone.com. And what I'm doing, I mentioned this is a three-part story. Parts one and two are already done, and they are up there on that website. You can read the whole of them for free. Part three is a much longer chapter. It's probably going to be in the ballpark of like 70 pages. And I am posting a page a day until that section is complete. So probably by like midsummer, the entire book is going to be up online. And in the meanwhile, people can follow it along as a like one page every day webcomic that updates regularly. And which has been very fun. I've missed working on webcomics since doing As the Crow Flies way back in the day. So I've been really enjoying getting back into at least a little mini short form web comic for this. And if people are interested in anything that I was just talking about with like horror, with allegory, with lesbian romance, I would encourage you to check this out. You can read the whole thing for free right now.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, Mel, so glad to connect with you. Glad to hear about your work and the way that you're using the story, the way that you're exploring genre in the story, and looking forward to seeing how it all comes together. Did we miss anything that you want to make sure to include before we close out?
No, no, this does it. Thank you for making time for me. I love getting to chat about horror, especially. So this was a lot of fun.
Absolutely, absolutely. Glad to have you back anytime.